A year ago, believe it or not, I was just like you. A complete mess. I was a slave to my screens, a chronic consumer of content, a soulless zombie desperately searching for his next hit of dopamine. I used to spend most of my waking hours glued to several devices at once, and when I could finally come up for air from these short-term instant gratifications, I'd look at myself in the mirror, naked, miserable with what I saw. I was wasting a significant portion of my life, comparing myself to internet heroes and obsessing over my own lack of success or popularity or genuine societal value. But there was a solution. It began with this: dopamine detox. Cutting yourself off completely from all sources of dopamine for a period of time to reset yourself to a baseline. But does it work? Can you ever really enjoy things again like a regular human being after constantly blasting your brain with artificial dopamine all day, every day? Well, I'm here to tell you that the short answer is yes. And the long answer is something I like to call Sam's Piss. Now, for those of you who've been following my online journey, and I cannot thank you enough for your invaluable anonymous attention, you'll know that for most of my life, I've been dealing with any and all forms of mental health issues. Depression, anxiety, chronic fatigue, regret, brain fog, bisexuality, worthlessness. But I'm always searching for ways to improve despite these setbacks. And over the last few months, I've developed and put into practice my own flawless system that has truly changed my life for the better. And I like to call it Sam's Piss. I don't like to exaggerate, but this is 100% a guaranteed method of achieving true, ultimate happiness. But I will warn you, it isn't easy, and your success is entirely dependent of how much work you're willing to put in. But enough of that. What is Sam's Piss, right? I'm glad you asked. Step 1. Social media. Pretty self-explanatory, right? But we've all been there. I used to lie in bed for hours until my eyes were raw and my brain was melting out of my skull from doom scrolling on any social media app that you can think of. Now, this process did begin as just a detox. My plan was to eliminate social media from my life for a set length of time so that I could reset my brainwaves. And that's what I did. Without using these apps, I was bored, sad, lonely, empty, unfulfilled. And not being able to rely on social media to fill that gaping void inside of me made me realize just how dependent on them I had become. And after doing this detox for an entire 24 hours, which I guess with sleep it was more like a 12-hour detox, but it really changed things. It shifted my perspective. It allowed me to reflect on the person that I was, but also who I wanted to be. And when I did get back on all the apps after that first detox, it felt really good, but I could feel myself slipping back into that familiar routine, one that I knew was destroying my brain. Detoxing, it turns out, is just a temporary solution. But this was the point where the true power of Sam's Piss began to emerge. If I wanted to achieve ultimate happiness, which we all do, right? Then I had to aim for the ultimate detox, as detoxified as you can possibly get. And so, over the next few weeks, I weaned myself off of social media. I managed to delete every single app without reinstalling any of them. But the process was tough. Many sleepless nights, and tears, and screams, and breakdowns. But the one thing that really kept me going through that time was just knowing that I'd be able to make a video about the experience for you guys, strangers on the internet, to show you just how rewarding this process can truly be. Step 2. All other media. Removing all social media from my life, while a complete success, meant that I now had to find something else to replace all my newfound time. And the next most obvious thing was all forms of other traditional media. Movies, TV shows, video games, books, sports, music, podcasts, radio, magazines, newspapers. All of these began to take up every waking second of my existence. And pretty quickly I realized that replacing social media with all these other forms of media is just like replacing heroin with marijuana's. Just as bad. Now, this proved to be just as tough as step 1. I was a paying customer to more streaming services than most people can even name. I wanted absolutely anything I could get my hands on because I was addicted to choice and freedom, which ironically kept me from being free. But eventually, in the spirit of Sam's Piss and true happiness, I even sold all of my TVs, my computer and monitor, every screen I had that could possibly allow me to relapse on this dopamine addiction so that I wouldn't even have the option. The only thing I did keep was my phone, because I still needed it for reasons outside of dopamine, and Sam's Piss wasn't crazy enough to get rid of that. Yet, step 3 Masturbation and porn. It's no secret how big a deal this step was going to be for me. I've talked extensively about porn and masturbation, why I do it and how I do it, why it's good for you, why I'll never stop doing it 5 or 6 times a day. But all that was before Sam's piss was flowing through me. Masturbation, it turns out, was just another form of dopamine addiction. One that was really difficult for me to accept. But in the name of ultimate happiness, I knew I had to eliminate it from my life. My method was to initially just cut down on masturbation, but still allow myself to watch porn on its own, just so that I could gradually remove it from my routine. A way to get some of that familiar excitement without actually letting myself ejaculate semen. I would get constant urges, more than I could handle, and I had to figure out a way to ignore them. So what I ended up doing, and what any of you potential Sam's pisses can do, and it does hurt at first, but it makes controlling the urges much easier. And what you want to do is take a rubber band or hair tie, like this, one that has some good strength to it. And you just want to kind of keep it wrapped tight at all times around the base of your genitals. And if you're anything like me and the urges are just impossible to control, then what you can do is take that hair tie or rubber band and just kind of wrap it back over itself 2, 3, 5, as many times as you can to fully cut off that circulation and therefore the urges. So I did that pretty much straight away and I have not looked back since. And aside from occasional pains and some weirdly dark urine, it's been absolutely incredible for my mental health. Also just for my female audience, which I know there's a few of you, I'm sure there's a way to cut off circulation to the pussy for the same effect, but I'm not entirely sure about it personally. So you'll have to look into that yourselves. Like I always say, do your own research, guys. And just as a side note, you might want to include sex and fornication in this step as well. But for me personally, I didn't need to worry about that. Step 4, social interaction. People will try to tell you that social interaction is good for you and helps with all manner of mental health issues. But I'm here to tell you that interacting with other human beings is just another form of taking a huge drag from the dopamine cigarette. I personally was very far from addicted to being social, considering 99% of my time was spent on screens. But what little there was in my life still had to go. And the difficult thing about this step is that your success is not entirely dependent on just you. It's affected by external influences as well. Your family, friends, even strangers in public, all of them will try to interact with you. But you cannot allow this to happen if you're seeking true happiness. And Sam's piss. So I blocked and deleted every contact in my phone. When I inevitably had to leave the house, maybe once a week, I could not talk or signal or interact with people at all. I had to ignore everyone. No eye contact with strangers, no small talk with cashiers, anything like that. I actually started to wear these big dark sunglasses just so that I could hope everyone would assume I was blind and deaf and mute. And that was the easy part. When my family eventually did start to wonder why they hadn't heard from me in weeks, especially considering I lived in my parents' garage, they wouldn't give up easily. But to guarantee my continued prolonged success with Sam's piss, I had to make a change. I left everything, all my belongings, my phone, my old life behind so that I could continue this new one. I didn't tell anyone anything. I didn't tell them where I was going or what I was doing or why. I just disappeared. And I have to say, things were really starting to look up. I was getting that much closer to achieving my true ultimate happiness. Step 5. Pleasure and enjoyment. By this point, I was relying pretty heavily on things like journaling, meditation, food and water, just having thoughts in general to keep myself busy or entertained. But, and you guessed it, these are still things that provide pleasure in some way, and therefore dopamine, and therefore are bad. The goal of step 5 then was to eliminate anything not completely necessary. Yes, you need some of those things to survive. I know that. You know that. We all know that. But where you have to draw the line is if you're doing something for pleasure or out of pure necessity. So, I only drank water when I was on the brink of passing out from dehydration. I'd only eat food when my stomach felt like it was about to collapse in on itself from hunger. But only ever plain unsalted rice. Just enough nutrients to survive. No flavor or anything that might provide pleasure. I even stopped meditating and journaling because they would bring me pleasure in those moments. Sam's piss just wouldn't allow it. I had to be satisfied with just a pure baseline existence and nothing more to be truly happy. When I got to the point of cutting off all of this stuff, most of my time I would just spend in my car, which I did still have because I needed to live somewhere. And this brought me into a pretty difficult period where I struggled between thinking thoughts for pleasure, but that not being allowed, so then trying not to think about anything, but that being a form of meditation, which itself would bring pleasure and was therefore not allowed. There was a lot of inner battling around this time, but I did eventually manage to get it under control. And this is another Sam's Piss secret for all of you. Instead of thinking or not thinking, what I would do is just sit in my car, stare at my hands, and I would just stare at them while making this constant sound that would distract me from thinking or not thinking, keep me focused but not too focused. And it worked. So it would just be something like, and that would keep me occupied for hours every day, which was incredibly helpful on this journey to true happiness. Step 6. Internet. You might be thinking, wait, step 6? Am I talking about cutting off the internet after not eating or drinking or thinking thoughts for pleasure? But hear me out and trust the Sam's Piss process. Even though I wasn't using the internet for pleasure, I didn't even have a phone anymore. The problem was that the internet is all around us at all times. You walk around and you see advertisements, which is a form of media. You walk into a store and you see people using internet banking to pay for things. You walk past someone wearing headphones and they're streaming a podcast. Someone walking their dog has a tracking thing on its collar. Even just being around people having a regular, normal conversation, 99% of the time, they're talking about the latest TikTok they've seen. It's these little things that make this step one of the hardest because the internet is so prevalent in our lives. Not having any connection or exposure to it at all is extremely difficult to do in modern society. The only way you can effectively remove it from your life is to remove yourself from that society. And that's how I've been thriving since step 6. I currently live in a little patch of wilderness that I found that has absolutely zero internet signal. So it's entirely impossible for the internet airwaves to even get into my brain. Which would technically count. And it's a very secluded and isolated spot, which means I never have to worry about secondhand exposure. And I know what you're thinking, making this video and putting it on the internet for all of you to see, that violates all of this, yes. But this is a very special exception, one that I will allow myself if it means sharing this message with all of you guys, letting more people know about Sam's Piss and hopefully convincing some of you who've been searching for an answer to give it a try too. Step 7. Sleep. The final step. Thankfully, after everything else, it's not as difficult as you'd think. Again, yes, you need sleep to survive. I know you do. Everyone knows that. I'm not trying to kill myself. I'm just trying to achieve ultimate happiness. And that means only sleeping when it's entirely necessary. Not just if you feel like it or just to pass the time or something. There can be no pleasure involved. So when I'm out in my little isolated wilderness spot, my time basically entirely consists of standing in one spot, staring at my hands and making that constant sleeping when my body is incapable of staying awake any longer, drinking water only when it's absolutely necessary, only eating food when my body is about to crumble and collapse, and I think it's safe to say that I'm pretty close to achieving ultimate happiness, just absolutely engulfed by the warmth of Sam's Piss. In my old life, I'd spend most of every day on my phone, on screens, wasting my life away watching pointless content, never experiencing anything of true value or significance. And now, well, I no longer rely on those temporary experiences. I'm actually alive and living my life for the first time. As you've just heard, it has truly changed my life. And I believe it could change yours too, if you're willing to have a little taste of Sam's Piss for yourself. So, obviously, you can see that I'm not in my wilderness spot right now. I actually had to hitchhike into town, which was not easy considering all the social interaction and internet I had to avoid. But I'm currently in an old friend's house who doesn't know that I'm here using their camera and their internet in their spare room. I'm hoping they don't come back anytime soon because I don't really want to deal with that. But once this is all finished and uploaded, I will be heading back out there to continue to exist in my infinite, ultimate happiness. I've broken a lot of Sam's Piss rules to provide this update for you guys, so my greatest appreciation for watching the video, and if you subscribe, like the video, comment on it, ask any questions you have, I'd be happy to answer them. I guess I won't be replying anytime in the foreseeable future, or even know if you've liked or subscribed, but I'd love to promote discussion and awareness around Sam's Piss because this system truly works. Guys, I can honestly say I have never been happier. Alright, I hope you've enjoyed this little sample of Sam's Piss, and I'll see you guys very soon. Well, hopefully not.